So in this video, we'll be talking about our measures of sizing. And for us, that's going to mean two things. That's going to mean absolute measures of sizing and relative measures of size. So for all intents and purposes, that's going to boil down here, and you can see it in a computer you are not looking at. You can see it here in session 3 under the pixels, points, percents, and EM. So the two absolute sizes are pixels and points. You're already familiar with both pixels and points, right? Because you've been using points, PT, without realizing what it means for quite some time. So for all of us that have any measure of exposure to things like Microsoft Word, for example, you use a 12-point font. Now, as an instructor, I know that that is bullshit. You don't use 12-point font unless you have to. You use Arial with a 14-point font because you fit fewer words on a page. But nonetheless, a point is actually a fixed unit of measure. So what that means is, irrespective of the machine that you are producing your magnum opus, right, that pile of bullcrap for your psychology papers or for your English papers or whatever happens to be. I was a student too once like you. I know exactly what you guys are doing. What you are using is a point. Each one of those points is 1/72 of an inch. So the font means that each one of those letters in your word takes up 1/72 or thereabout of an inch. So it depends the spacing. It's called the kern between the letters. So some letters are closer together where other ones are what are known as monospaced. So a lowercase I, for example, would take up the exact same amount of space as an uppercase K or an M or something wider. Arial does that. That's why Arial as a font takes up way more room on a page, because it's making every letter act as though it's the same size. So a period is the same size as an uppercase letter, which means you get to squeeze less bullcrap into the same amount of space, which, for academia, that's perfect. So a point is 1/72 of an inch, and that is everywhere. So if you are on a Mac, if you are on a PC, if you are on an iPhone, if you are on an iPad, that is this thing that I'm recording this off of, all of those things are 1/72 of an inch if you are using points for your fonts. So that means that something on my big 27-inch 4K monitor is going to take up exactly the same size as it is here on my iPad mini. So that's why it's referred to as absolute. On the other side, we also have actually on the same side, we also have a pixel. So a pixel is what? It is a dot, right? So I don't need to get too far into the weeds on that way. A pixel is literally just a dot. But the challenge with a pixel is, here on my iPad, a pixel is a certain size, right? But here on my 5K iMac, that pixel is a vastly different size. It is way smaller. So over here on the other side of my office, I have a 32-inch television, right? That 32-inch TV is a 1080p monitor. So that means that there's 1080 pixels up and down. So it's 1920 by 1080. So 1080 pixels up and down. Those pixels are tremendous in comparison to over here on my 5K iMac. So those are challenging to use, because whatever machine it is that you develop your web pages on is going to look one way. And you will spend a lot of time and effort to make that one machine's web page look fantastic, right? And then you publish it on the internet, and somebody else has a different kind of machine that they're going to render your page on, and things are not going to look the same. As a matter of fact, on some machines, they're going to be terrible and not look the same way at all. That's why we like to use relative spacing. Now, this is session 3, and you have seen relative spacing go all the way back to chapter 4 when you saw percents. But here in chapters 5, 6, and 7, we're going to start shedding everything being in points and pixels, and we are going to start moving for percents and EMs. Those two are our relative fonts. The benefit to a relative font is, here on my 5K iMac, if I say 45%, that means 45%. And here on this iPad, when I say 45%, that means 45% for this iPad. Not that iMac, this iPad. So when I move to a cell phone, which is even smaller, right? So the pixels on here are going to be smaller than the pixels on here. But still, when I say 45%, that's 45%. So the thing to know about percents and EMs are as follows, that they are relative is number one. So that means it will look more uniform across a wider variety of devices because, in fact, the device refers to itself when using those percents. So that's the first benefit of switching from absolute, so pixels and points, to relative percents and EMs. A percent is the percent is of the element that you are in now. So if I say 100%, that means whatever the stock sizing is for the element you're on now. So in H1, a paragraph, any of the classes or IDs, I need a coffee. Any of the classes or the IDs that you would have defined in your CSS, all of those start off with a value of 100%. So whatever you claim for them, that's 100%. Now, if you want it bigger, 200 or 300% makes them bigger. If you want them smaller, 75, 50% shrinks that value down. On the EM side, that can be a little bit more challenging for you as a beginning developer. One EM refers to whatever the standard is for the browser. So I will tell you that when I design web pages, so if I come through here on rvccis.info or any of our other rvccis.org, any of our other properties through here that we maintain for Rock Valley College, those I tend to use EM for because I've grown more accustomed to it and I have a better understanding. It'll feel a little strange in the beginning. So one EM refers to whatever the standard is for that page based on the browser in the beginning. The good news is there's really only two browsers you need to worry about anymore. Chrome and Edge are actually based on the same rendering engine, so they will look the same. Safari, at least for right now, Safari and Firefox use the same rendering engine, so they will look the same. So that means if you test your page on Chrome, let's say, because who's going to do it on Edge, really? If you test your page on Chrome and if you test your page on Firefox, you can be assured that almost 99% of every client, every potential future client that comes your way is going to be able to view your content the way you want. So larger than 1 EM is bigger, 2 EM, 1.75 EM. Smaller rather than 1 EM is smaller. So 0.5 EM, 0.7 EM. So there's a little bit of experimentation that you'll have to do there. But the good news is with percents and EMs, you do not have to specify how many absolute pixels or points something has to be. So think about things like images. This is where I know some of you have already encountered issues with your case studies especially with the yoga door. This is the one I'm thinking about, especially right here. In chapter 6, when you finished, and I do not recall which of the 3 pages it is, I apologize, but when you finish your Path of Light Yoga Studio, some of you will have noticed that in your rendered pages in Chrome or Firefox or Safari or Edge, that the footer and the image of your door overlap. But then when you look back down at the screen capture that you are given in the textbook, they do not overlap. This is because of the difference between absolute and relative sizing. In chapter 6, you're doing everything in absolute sizing. So you are telling the browser that this particular image is, I forget what it is, I think it's 350 pixels wide. On the old machine that they were doing screen captures for the text, that 350 pixels represents a fixed amount of space. On your machines, probably that 350 pixels is much smaller. So when the height comes around and the machine that they used for the textbook says 500 pixels, and your machine comes along and says 500 pixels, your machine, 500 pixels is much smaller. So now your footer and your yoga door overlap, whereas in the textbook, they do not overlap. This can be fixed with percent and EM. If you claim that that image is 30% of the width of your page, and you maintain that the height is just auto, right? And you will see that here in chapter 7 when you're going through and you're working with images and absolute and relative sizing. You are going to see this in code here with chapter 7. When you have your automatic height attached to a percent of a width, that is going to maintain your page for you without having to be so granular about, well, but what's it going to look like on a 1080p monitor? What's it going to look like on a 4K monitor, a 2K monitor? It doesn't matter. Use those relative sizes, percents and EMs, where you can, so that you do not have to worry about fiddling with individual pixels and individual points, because that is much more difficult to have to do.